Oh, hello everyone. A warm welcome to this session on interview skills and preparation for consultant and SAS doctors. It's lovely to have you here. My name is Susie Edwards and I'll be taking you through this session. What I was just going to say to you is just a few bits of housekeeping. So if you're new to GoToWebinar, one of the things that happens with GoToWebinar is that you don't necessarily see my face, but obviously you can hear me and see the screen. The other thing that you can do at any stage, you'll see that there is a drop-down box where you can type in questions. Do use the question box to do that, and you'll find that at various points I might ask you a question for you to pop in there. What I would say is that with the questions, they come directly to me, so I am the only person that sees them. So what I then will do is, with the questions that come back, I'll then make sure that I read that out so that everyone else can hear it. The idea being is that it can come in anonymously, but I can then also group questions thematically so that we can build them in. So that's the idea of the question box. Just to test that for a moment, if you could type into the question box, just letting me know your background, your level would be great. You know, so whether you're what stage that you're at in your career. So that would be lovely to go into the question box now. The other thing to mention is that for those of you who stay for the whole of the live session, which we're doing now, one of the things that you'll receive after the webinar is finished, and the team will send this across in the days ahead, you'll get a certificate of attendance, and so that will come through in the coming days ahead. And so I can already see, thank you so much for popping in, so I can see someone's at is post CCT, who's in a fellow post, also in clinical oncology, ST7, just post CCT in anesthesia, and then doctors working through SAS working through on the Caesar path. That's great. Many thanks for sharing so far. Keep those coming in as you go through. So that's wonderful. So I can also see that there's a specialty doctor also in sexual health. A warm welcome. And so it's great to just sort of know the background. So what I wanted to do was take you through a series of things now. And so if I just bring that up on the screen now, the first thing. So I want you to think about 4 key areas that I wanted to work through with you. And each of these I'll take in turn. You'll find that I might sort of mix things in based on what you need and say as well. And so I can also see that there's someone else, a senior fellow in neonates as well, a warm welcome. So for me, I want to really think about the preparation. The reason for that is that there's a number of things that we can do in relation to the interview where we can actually think about the types of questions that could be asked based on the way, a few things actually. One related to the way the job description is written, how the competencies are asked for, and then also based on the current trends and aspects of happening within the departments or within the pathways that you're into. And one of the things I was going to ask you all, I'm going to launch a poll. And so the poll that's going to be launched now is, it will bring up a series of questions, which is, when is your interview taking place? So is it happening quite soon? Is it next month? Is it in the months ahead? Or no fixed date yet, but you're in the planning stage? So it'd just be good for me to sort of know what's taking place there. And then I can have a little look at that. And then once those have come through, for any reason, if you can't answer the poll, then type it into the question box. Because sometimes if you're on a phone or a certain iPad, you can't actually get into the poll. Okay, so I can see, for example, one person, thank you, you've popped the planning stage just now. And so let me just see where everyone is now. And Amrita, who's with us, Amrita, when you think that everyone's sort of finished with the poll, then don't hesitate to sort of close it and share it with everyone, if that's okay. Yeah, that's great. And so we can see here, nice. So there's a sort of nice mix of background. For those of you who've got ones coming up very imminently in the next month, would you mind just sharing with me, for example, is it on virtual or is it in person? And also just in terms of whether you've been given the format, because there's lots of different styles at the moment of how things are being created. So I can just share some thoughts, particularly if it's on Teams or the equivalent. I'm just thinking about the types of things that are going place. Okay, so that's wonderful. Thank you all for doing that as well. So I can see that coming through. And so what I can see so far is that people, yeah, so some of you have got them in person now. There's no format as yet. For other people, you've got it as well, sort of in person, and that you know that there's a group of people who you're going to be interviewed by. So this is helpful for me. So thank you so much for sharing. So I guess one of the things that had been different over the last sort of 18 months was that there was much more virtual than in person. And I think that one of the things that's sort of evolving now is, as we move back into in person, the actual interview process and the style of it alters again. So it's just good. So if any of you have got virtual, let me know. And I can also see here is that some of you have mentioned that you've got up to 6 in the panel. So you've got a really nice, you've got to go have a mix of people in that one there in terms of similar level, but also different background. So this is really helpful. And in terms of the panel that you have with the 6 people, do you also have people who are not non-clinicians as well as clinicians? Just useful to know too. Yeah, so that's great. So thank you, everyone. So I can see that the majority of you have got a combination of it really predominantly being in person now rather than actually virtual. And then for those of you who've got panel, one of the things that you have got happening here is that you've got a group of 6 and it's a combination of clinical and non-clinical. And what's really useful for that is that with the combination, you're going to have set questions coming from the clinical side, but you also will have things potentially connected to patient experience, other aspects that relate to that depending on your role. There may well also be an equivalent of an HR within that too, asking particular questions. But it's also useful for you because when it comes to, do you have questions for us? Then you've got a range of people that you can actually get that information from. And don't hesitate to put in any questions that you would like for me to answer as well. And so I'll start to do that. And I can see that one has come through. I'll hold it for a moment, but definitely answer it as I go through here. So for each of you, you're going to have different aspects of the way that you're going to plan. And so within the preparation and planning stage, for those of you who are, even with the imminent roles, there's nothing that can get away from doing whatever planning and preparation that you've got. So the two on the left hand side here, you can see that I put the job description and person spec. And one of the things that's absolutely fantastic to do, if you can, is when you're really looking at the job description and the person spec, when you go, and I'll give an example of a person spec in a moment, just to sort of remind you if you haven't looked at one for a while, just in terms of the attributes, the headings that come in. But what you're able to do and sort of extrapolate from that is particular questions that could be asked. So you're able to sort of be able to understand the certain competencies that someone might be looking for. And then what would be great to be able to do with that is really thinking about your narrative behind it. So mapping examples that you've got from the past and also from current examples that really connect into those. And one of the things that I find is that sometimes that work, sometimes you don't do as enough of that as you could do. So with the mapping of the examples, you could either do that, you can do it on the computer, of course, you can do it flip chart, post-it notes, but what you're trying to really do is really think about, with that example, what competency is that highlighting? So for example, if there's something that's connected to really understanding around certain aspects of communication, you're going to have so many examples where you're able to demonstrate certain types of communication. But what you might want to really think about is scenarios where it's complex information that you've had to communicate. If you're communicating within a team setting, so you're really thinking about the dynamics of the team and particularly around conflict, what examples do you have of this, when people have not got on? And thinking about what did you do? And I'll give you techniques and we'll talk more about this. But the key thing here is that spending time on that now, it just gives you much more confidence to know that you've got different examples that you can go to. And this in particular is one that I see people not doing enough of. And so that's why I wanted to bring it in now. And then the one underneath, I think that for many of you, I'm absolutely confident that you'll be doing all of this and more, but particularly thinking there's always something now connected to values and vision. So thinking about the values of the trust and making sure that you're kind of aligned with the vision. So again, no matter whether you're going for a role which is internal or a role that's external, it makes so much sense to go and have a look at go back and have a look at the website and actually also have a look at other social media feeds around things that are going on within the trust or practice that you're in, the area that you're going into, thinking about the departments that you're in. And then also making sure that you're really clear on the structure and the team, because one of the things, of course, that you can do there is you can organically work out, where your strengths lie within the team, so what you can bring into it. So when you start to have a think about how the structure of the team that you're going into, is it a brand new role or is there a previous incumbent? So all of this activity that you can do is so invaluable. And so for those of you who are starting this process now, it'd be great to hear about the kinds of things that you've done so far to find out more. So have you started to think about your strengths and how they align with where you're going next? and looking at the areas of expertise that you have, and actually your areas of interest. And later I'll show you some questions where this particular knowledge is really useful. And so I think that for me, that's really helpful to sort of bring in as well. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see here that I've got four little bullet points. And again, if you're able to research who will be on the panel in the respective roles, so for example, one of your colleagues knows exactly who's on the panel, what you're able to try and do is really think about, so this is who's on the panel, this is the different roles and responsibilities that they have, this might be the key areas of focus that they have. And so just wanting to make sure that you have got that insight. And again, for those of you who've got interviews coming up relatively soon, would you mind sharing in the question box whether you've had an opportunity to do any pre-interview? So being able to go into the interview itself and have a conversation with them prior to it. So any pre-interview. And so, great. So for those of you who have, what insights would you share in terms of how beneficial it was? And so for some of you, you've not had an opportunity to yet, but when you actually went into it, what is useful to think about for those of you who've not gone in yet is to think about the questions that you might want to be asking. So for example, if you're due to go in shortly, you might want to be thinking about, thinking about with the panel members and who might be there. So there could be a chief exec, a director, clinical director, consultants. There might well be a lay. You'll have kind of non clinicians as well that might be in there too. So it's just understanding around the team experiences and expectations might be great to ask. And the other thing might be thinking about the department's place in the trust. You might want to be, if it's appropriate, you might want to be asking a bit about, any changes that have taken place, any current reforms or organisational changes, things like that you can kind of get abreast of. And then perhaps if the trust is looking at certain aspects of performance, you'll be able to see some of this online as well, but just looking at the direction of travel. And so the questions that you've got for them are really useful to build. But for those of you who've had that already, it'd be really interesting to think about when you went there, how beneficial it was. So for those of you who've said yes, there's quite a few of you. So yeah, brilliant. So you mentioned around the new service, thinking about the trust, the challenges ahead. That's great. So for others that have got that coming through, yeah, you were also saying that you mentioned about the team, the changes to the team and the way that things are evolving. All of these questions that you build up really help you to build a picture of the types of things that might well come up for the future. And so I guess in terms of other homework, you've got opportunity to look at, say, the Trust annual report, you can look at CQC, you can have a look at also any relevant board meetings, everything's online. And I think that one of the questions that can be really useful to ask and in fact, one of your colleagues has actually mentioned this, which is really thinking about, I was going to say, thinking about the priorities that are going to take place over the next year. And one of your colleagues has said here, which is fantastic, which is asked about what they see as their key development areas, what they are, and trying to understand that. So what's useful about that is that you can then, when it comes to the interview, really think about what you can bring in terms of adding value to that area and how you can see your skills and experience benefiting the team. But also you can think about your own development as well. So I think all of that is really useful to build. And so for those not going in, so for those that are pending and those that haven't taken place yet, what would be good to do is to perhaps build up that checklist. And obviously it will be fluid, there'll be other things that will come from it. And you'll potentially meet more than one person before you go to the interview, but it really gives you a good insight into what the actual role could look like, and also the department and how it flows and the way that the service is run. And so that's another thing that's also really useful to do. I'm going to bring up 2 slides now. It's in 2 halves. I just wanted to just for those of you who are maybe just still building up knowledge again and going for an interview for the first time. So there we go here, is that one of the things that I've got on here is that I've got 2 different a job specification here and a description, just to show you a person spec. And one of the things that's on here is 2 halves. So you can see here in the first half, hopefully everyone can see this okay on the screen, is you can see that there's particular criteria that you're always asked for, and you can start to see here in terms of I've just picked a role just to highlight, but you're obviously able to see here that you're going to get particular experience for this role, really looking at the acute and community setting, You're also going to be able to think about time management, workload. You're also going to be asked about things to do with the inpatient experience, and particularly within this one, it's also connected into forensics. And so there's other areas of focus. And what you can sometimes find with a job description is that once you've got the aspects of the clinical competencies, then you also have some of the so you've got the aspects of teaching and supervision, which you can see here. So you're going to get a question around an aspect around your teaching. So, and then you're also going to get something around thinking about research and audit, quality improvement. And then this role also asks for movability. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is that what you're actually able to do is to start to be able to pinpoint definite competency questions that will be asked. So I just wanted to just make sure that for those of you that might not have looked at something for a while, many of you will have, but if you haven't, just some of the key areas. And for each role, there's lots of different ways that it's written. So you can find that you might get a job pack. Within the pack, it will give you loads of detail about what lies ahead, and it also will tell you about the team. But within this one here, this is just a shorter one that I just wanted to bring up on the screen so that you could see it to hand. And then I'm just going to just check on a particular questions. I'm just going to have a look. So there's a couple of questions that have come through. No, I know for sure that you can't see the comments. So one person's just asked. So at the very start, one of the things I will do is each of the questions come in to me alone, so that it's not a rolling chat. So I will relay questions that anyone has brought in as much as I can do, and I'll bring them in thematically. So you won't see the individual's comments, unfortunately. It's just the way that the GoToWebinar function works. And I can also see that there was a particular question connected to leadership and management, and I will come to that and get you to think about that too, so that you know that. So just with the leadership and management one, we'll do something particular on that. So I've seen it and we will tackle it. We'll just do it a little bit later if that's all right. Oh, great. Okay. And so in terms of thinking about what they are assessing and looking for, there's a number of things to think about in here. And so the clinical knowledge, you should feel, I hope, all of you, really confident and actually very relaxed about your own clinical knowledge and expertise, because you're already at a certain stage in your career where you've really come through that. And, you know, for you, you know, whether you're post-CCT or about to CCT, you really have a good understanding of the clinical aspects of what you do. And for some of you, you may well have had autonomous working, you've had opportunity to sort of lead and manage. And I guess in a way, one of the things to really think about in relation to making that transition to consultant and your next consultant roles is really thinking about the other aspects around you. So some of your other interests. So thinking about certain things that, for example, are you actively interested in certain aspects of medical education? And if you are, in what way? You know, if you have got a real interest in the way that innovation and change happens, or the way that service improvement evolves within the departments you've been in, then of course you're going to bring that up and share that at the interview. If you're someone who's more academically inclined and you've also built up a strong academic career, then that profile of where you are in your research and how that evolves will also come into the mix. So that really informs your clinical work. But there's something about the two where it's really useful to think about what are your interests that you've got, which are non-clinical as well as the clinical component. And then the third part is, you know, when you're at an interview, one of the things they're really looking at is, you know, can you do the job? Will you do the job? And how will you fit in with the dynamics of the team? And so that commitment and that motivation, I would often call it, I'm Scottish, so sometimes I would say the fire in your belly, the mojo, you know, what makes you get up in the morning and do what you do, and really thinking about what is it about this particular role that you're drawn to. So what sparked your interest in this one in particular, and what have you done to confirm that it's right for you? Because when you get those motivation questions, and I'll bring up a series of them for us to think about and for you to have a look at responding to, the motivation ones are so telling, because that's often the one that comes first. So usually that type of question is designed to put you at ease. So it might be something like, talk me through your CV, or tell me about your skills and experience and suitability for the role. And so when you've got things like that, some of you might have very good ideas on structure, but there are structures to try and help you to answer that, which I'll share. And then the other one is around your ability to communicate, your clinical communication skills. All of you will no doubt be excellent, but there'll be always an example connected to communication in some shape or form. And then there will be an area where they're thinking about your potential, you know, thinking about your direction of travel, about really from where you are now, where do you see yourself? And it might not necessarily be a question around where do you see yourself in 5 years, but it might be more around the potential of how you see your branch of practice evolving in terms of the way that you run a service, or it could be more around, you know, thinking about some of your non-clinical interests and how they combine together. And so there's lots of ways that you can already think beforehand. And the professionalism ones connected to governance, due diligence, anything that's in that area, which again are, and ethics, which are things that you can think about ahead of time. And so these are the kind of things that are taking place. And for the majority of you, you mentioned that you were more in person than virtual, but just in case there's a few more people who've joined the session, just in case there is anyone who's virtual, I suppose the key thing to really think about with the virtual interview, just very briefly, is that the main thing is about where your eye is focused. So of course everyone is in their own box and you're looking ahead, but one of the things that you can do with a remote interview is really make sure that your kind of preparation around your space and the environment is there. And it's really, the virtual interviews are a lot more concise often. So for those of you who've got virtual, do you know how many minutes you've got? Usually it's 30 to 45 minutes. Sometimes you'll be asked to do a presentation for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes at the start if you've been given it. But what you will find with the virtual interview is that it will be in different phases. So you'll definitely have that opportunity to really think about the clinical. There'll be some competency, behavioural questions, and then there'll also be things around thinking about your development and particular aspects around your experience. So you will find that the virtual interview is very concise. With anyone that I've had doing virtual interviews, and one of the things that they've done, which might sound a bit silly to say, but if you're doing your virtual interview at home rather than at work, then one of the things that can be quite nice to do is before the interview to actually leave the house, to walk around and come back in and say, I'm in my interview now. Because one of the things that can happen when you're doing it at home is you're around your own surroundings, and it's really important to break the space to think, this is it, I'm going in for the interview. When you're in person, it doesn't happen because you're physically going into the interview. With the in-person though, you have an opportunity to really think about how you use your body language and just making sure that you're able to mirror and just use your eyes accordingly, and making sure that if you're comfortable and it's appropriate, then you're able to, then you can also use your facial features in a way that can also help. So just thinking about how you can put yourself at ease. It's harder to do that virtually because it's harder to sort of see in the same way. I now want to move on to question types. And so I think this, for me, there's 6 different question types that tend to happen. So I'm going to bring this up now. And then what I'm then going to do is I'm going to go into each of these, and then I'm going to share some different acronyms for how to approach different situations, which I'm hoping will be really useful for you. So there's 3 different types I'm going to share depending on the situation. So you can see here I've got 1 to 6. I mean, it's not in any particular order, but one of the things that you will find is that you will get understanding questions, you know, particularly around, you know, thinking about what, you know, in terms of like, you might get something around, you know, what do you understand about the term integrated care systems? And like a follow-up could be, what do you see as the positives and the drawbacks? You know, or it could be, what does quality and care mean to you? You know, so the other thing to be thinking about, or it could be, you know, certain things around the understanding is usually around processes, systems, procedures. And so just in terms of your knowledge set, that's kind of how those work. So it might say, what are the essential elements of? And then the self-description ones are ones where it's much more around your own self-awareness and your ability to reflect, and also to listen, and how you potentially look at your strengths and think about looking at your, you know, your weaknesses as well, and thinking about your goals and how you would do that. So it's very much more about, you know, that how would you describe yourself in a particular situation. So it might be a question around your leadership, you know, and how would you describe your leadership style, and give me an example of this when you put it in practice. So, you know, so you might have something like that that comes through. And then with an example like that, you know, for example, within leadership, all of us will have different styles based on the context and the situation. But one of the things that's just out of interest, connected to the NHS People Plan, and also work that's taking place at the moment within compassionate and inclusive leadership, it would make sense to have a look at things connected to that if it's a leadership-based question. There's a really there's a free series from the King's Fund on really looking at compassionate leadership. So if it's an area that's new to you that you want to know about, you can actually just Google the King's Fund and compassionate leadership, and it can be quite useful because it's something that's very current, but also may well be very relevant for yourself. So when you're thinking about the description ones, it's also really useful to think about, well, how would I act in that situation? What would I do? And then when you've got the scenario or the ethical questions, those ones, in a sense, many of those will be a particular example where you would necessarily be needing to think in a particular way. So if there's a scenario, one of the things that you'd always want to be doing, and there's a technique which I'm going to bring up, which is the technique is called SPIES, S-P-I-E-S. I'll bring it up on a slide now, and then I'll come back to this one so you can see it. It's the middle one here. And so with the SPIES, one of the things that's really important about any ethical dilemma is that you are able to follow a particular structure for yourself in terms of the interview. So you're able to tell the interviewer, how you would manage that. So the technique is where you seek information, so for example, what would you do to try and find out everything possible about the situation? And then you'd then be thinking at the utmost about patient safety, quality and care. The third part would be, is there anything that I have done to, like the initiative side, anything that I could do to do this, and when do I know when I need to escalate and what support do I require? And so one of the things of that which can be quite good is that it can help you to have a structure to frame your responses. So that's sometimes one of the great ways of having different ways of thinking about the interview and the different processes. And then the behavioural questions are ones where it's really thinking about, describe a situation of when you, so this is around particular aspects of your competencies. So it might well be things looking at, managing time, teams, team dynamics, thinking about your role within that, aspects of you as a leader, thinking about how you would bring and improve the service. There's so much good stuff that you can start to think about in there. And also alongside that, you can sometimes find the tell me about your experience of, and that might also include things around change and also around innovation, about your particular knowledge of an area and how you see that developing over the next few years. So it might be around, thinking about your specialty, that you're moving into. So for some of you who are in, the specialties that you're in, they might well ask you about, for example, for the neonate, for example, it might be thinking about, what are the key developments that are taking place in neonates at the moment, and where are you in relation to that in terms of the technology that you're working on, in terms of the research that you're doing, the teaching. So it will be based on you, but thinking about your specialty. And you can also think about something around future trends. So what do you see as the main challenges facing our specialty over the next few years, but it also might be around the trends. So it's such a good exercise to think about, within my space, what's going on. And again, that's sometimes one where I see people, you can't prepare for everything, but you can certainly give yourself the best chance. And so things like that can be so useful to get your head around as well. And then the motivation questions are ones around, if you were successful in securing this role, what would you be looking forward to the most in this position? And then conversely, the least. So it's understanding a little bit more about your drivers and aspects around that. So it's your passion for the specialty and for the direction of travel of you as a consultant or a specialty doctor in the way that you're progressing. And so with the motivation questions, if I bring up the next slide that I had a moment ago and just explain something on here. So for example, number 1, where I've got CAMP, this is particularly useful for the motivation style questions. So, and what this does is it gives you a framework for you to be able to convey all the relevant information that you need to as concisely as possible. So for example, talk me through your skills and experience and suitability for this position. I'd like to talk you through 4 aspects: my clinical, my academic, my management and personal experiences that are all relevant for this role. So for example, you can then use that and then go through it. So the first one will be your clinical. Then if you've got any relevant academic, then it would be that one. Then it would be your management and how you see that taking shape, and anything that's outside that's relevant for the role. But what that does for the listener is it really helps them to know, this is what they're doing first, this is what they're doing second, this is what they're doing third, and so on. But it gives you that process, which is so useful. Now, I'm going to bring up some questions around motivation, and I'm going to ask you a particular question in particular. And for those of you, who can, it would be great for you to maybe just highlight a few things that you feel that you would want to share. So, for example, in these motivation questions, these are all basically similar questions worded in a different way. So I just mentioned the top one actually, which was talk me through your skills and experience. But this second one, why are you interested in working for this department? For those of you who are going for roles soon, it'd be really interesting to just get your thoughts and what is it that you're interested in terms of working in that department. If you want to pop it into the question box now, then that would be fantastic. But what you want to be thinking about with this one, why are you interested, is no doubt you'll have done some background research. You'll also have thought about what stage the department's at in terms of its growth, whether they've had organisational change or not, whether there's a number of roles coming available, but also thinking about the changes that are taking place and how you fit within that. And then you might have questions which are, what is making you change roles at this stage in your career? So understanding, for those of you who are at consultant roles already, who are moving to other roles, what's making you move at this time? So when with a question like that, one of the things that you want to think about is, you may well have taken your career as far as you can do within the department that you're in, and one of the reasons that you're drawn to where you're going is because they're actively involved in an area that you're particularly interested in from a specialty perspective, or it could be that the department that you're going to is very focused on certain aspects of medical education that you're passionate about. So in a sense, one of the things that you want to think about there is really starting to understand a bit more around, what's making you make that change at this time. And then the other one, which is the one at the bottom, is what can you offer this department? So sometimes that question is very open. And again, that allows you to also go back to using the CAMP, the C-A-M-P. Does anyone have any questions at this time that they want to just pop in? Don't hesitate to do that if you've got any particular questions at this point. And underneath that, you can see that I've put here, if you were successful in securing this role, what would you have hoped to achieve within the first 6 months of joining? That question is really good to flip to actually ask the interview panel. So when you've got an opportunity to ask questions, which is, have you got any questions for us? One of the questions that you could then flip the other way was to say, if I was successful in securing this position, what would you have hoped I would have achieved within the first 6 months of joining? And so one of the things that's good about you asking that is you really get a sense of their priorities and really where they see your focus. And that can be very beneficial for you to then have follow up from there. But what it also shows is your motivation for really being involved in the department and being involved in the service and the team, but also you're thinking about, once I'm in there, I really want to get going. So there's a number of parts to that. So it'd be interesting to know if people have used something like that before, or whether that's a new idea that you could use. Let me know. And then what I'm just going to do next is start to move into just thinking about certain behavioural questions. So as we go through here, so I'm just double checking. Yeah, there we go through. Good. Okay. And so for those of you who are sharing examples on thinking about why you're interested in the department, thank you for doing that. It's useful for me to just see different things that are coming through. So don't hesitate to do that when you're ready. And so I'm going to move on to behavioural questions. And with the behavioural questions, one of the things that's really useful with the behavioural questions is thinking about this acronym. Now, if you were taught in the UK, if your medical education was in the UK, I would expect or suspect that you may well have had this technique shown to you before, which is looking at something called situation, task, action, result, and reflection. This acronym and this approach in terms of structuring is absolutely brilliant for answering these types of behavioural questions around the competencies. So for example, with a competency, when you're thinking about a competency around communication, then it's really good to do two things, which is thinking about, this is for you to do an exercise afterwards, is when I'm communicating really well, what are the behaviors of communication that I am demonstrating? You know, what do I do really well? And that may well be, you know, what it might be about how you explain information. And by explaining information clearly, one of the things that you really do is you avoid misunderstanding. The other thing that you might be very good at doing is being able to really listen with intent. And so as a consequence of that, then one of the things that you're able to do is to really make sure that everyone feels that they're included. And particularly when you're thinking about the roles that you're taking on, it's thinking about not just the behavior, but the result of that behavior. So a good exercise to do in relation to your interview preparation is taking the different competencies and thinking about the behavior of that competency, the result of that. So by doing that really well, what does that result in? And perhaps any examples that you can bring to life. So the narrative. And so I think that in a way, one of the things that you can start to do here, again, is really make it easier for yourself by doing some of this prep. So within the person spec, you know, you're going to have a whole range of things. So how you would answer different questions. So for example, if there was something which was really asking you to think about things in relation to the team, you know, what does good teamwork mean to you? Now, when you have a question like that, there's two parts to that. You want to be talking about the multidisciplinary nature of the teams and how you work together in collaboration, but you also want to give an example of where you've demonstrated really good teamwork and how you as a leader have then taken that on. You know, so as you make through the role, you know, what have you done to lead? Because remember, there's the big L and there's the little L of leadership. You know, it starts with you. So just thinking about what you do and what you bring and using the acronym. So for the S, it's around setting the scene. So that's the context. So it's really thinking about, with that example, what's the context? What's the situation that I want to highlight? Then what you're then doing next is really thinking about the task. What was I tasked to do? What did I need to do? And what actually took place? And what was the outcome of that? Or what did I learn from that experience? And so those examples, when you have that frame of reference, can be really helpful to help you to provide an example that's really clear and concise. And so I'm going to bring up some different headings relating to leadership and management, teaching, and service improvement and innovation. And so I just wanted to bring these up and just to get you to think about them to see how you might respond. And so I can also see many thanks. So I can see that different people have said that for them, you know, different reasons why they're really attracted to the department that they want to go and work in. So some people have said, you know, they're really interested in the education side. They want to really think about how they improve on their teaching and really share that best practice. I can see that someone else is mentioning around innovation and thinking about how they can bring their knowledge and innovation into the department that they're going into, particularly around their clinical practice. I can also see, I can also see someone else has mentioned about trying to help and support the junior doctors that they have to really develop and enhance their potential. And so that's really helpful to have here. And then, okay, and I've got a really good question that's come through. I need to read it properly, and I will do that because it's and just make sure that I've got it here. And so you can see on the screen here particular questions that I've created here around teaching and potentially around research as well. And one of the things that can be quite useful to think about is, what do you think makes a great training environment? And then the secondary question to that, you know, and whether it be a consultant or whether it be for SAS as a consultant coming into this role, what teaching or training would you like to bring into our team or department? And so if you're thinking about this is a particular question around someone who's really interested in education. And then the one underneath is also, it's just more, I wanted you to see the types of questions so that you can get an idea about if you had a question like that, how might you tackle it so that you can get a sense of it. And then this one here is, if you were successful in obtaining this role, how would you build your research interest into our department? So for example, sometimes I see people who've got really different, they might be working on aspects of clinical trials and they might be doing other kind of activity out with their current role. They might also be having other things in terms of research that they're doing, but it's very advantageous for them to also think about how they can use that and build it into where they're going and how they can see that evolving. So you would definitely use the techniques and both of those around the STAR. So you'd be thinking about, you know, thinking about your experience of training, you know, what you've seen, things that you would want to improve on, and how that, for that example, how you would take that ownership. And you may well have examples of where you've set up your own initiatives, you've been involved actively in other activities connected to this, but you get the idea about thinking about the types of questions that could come up. So with the service improvement and innovation, that one should be hopefully more straightforward. So talk me through a service improvement initiative that you've been involved in, and then there's what specifically did you do to contribute to it. And so the idea behind that is really getting a sense of, obviously an example that you have, but it's also more so about what you did and in what way, and it's also helpful for the interviewers to see where your areas of interest lie. And so the one underneath that, again, for many trusts, they will have gone through a change, and thinking about change and how you manage yourself around change and thinking about what you might bring in, this is also another good thing to think about in relation to this. So for example, in this one here, it's saying what business or innovation opportunities could you bring. So I suppose in order to be able to answer that, you do need to have a bit of background research, which is what, in terms of what's going on in the department, and then actually thinking about within your areas of interest, how could that come into it. So it's always coming back to you. And then the leadership and management side. So one of your colleagues earlier mentioned a question where they were asking about leadership and management, where they had a specific question that related to leadership and management, but they weren't able to necessarily answer it in the best way that they could. And I suppose when you see questions like this, so within this one here saying the NHS long-term plan, I know you can see it, highlights the importance of visible senior clinical leadership. And then it's saying, what is your leadership style? I think in a way with this one, if you have, many of you will have different types of styles, like, as I said earlier, based on your own background, but what you want to be able to do is to think about how you might have led. And so at different stages of your career, you may well not have had opportunities to take a complete leadership role, where you've been leading and managing a team, but during the course of your career, you will have had projects and activities that you will have done where you will have taken an active lead in it, and you may well have walked across boundaries, so working with different departments, being able to make that work. And so you could bring in examples of this that would help you to do that. And then I guess the other one that's underneath is more around knowledge, thinking about integrated care systems. So just again, and just in terms of that's here, then these types of things are really useful for you to think about. And so I've got a question that I want to read, and I'm just going to read that now, and I'm just going to bring up a slide, because some people had mentioned before that it's quite useful to just remind themselves just of aspects of, if you're going through an example around clinical governance, what might be each of those steps. So I'm putting that up on the screen here, and then I'm just going to have a look at the question that someone's written here. So this person is asking, for certain, so this person is just saying, from their perspective, they've been keeping a close eye on different interview questions that's being asked, and they're moving into a consultant role, and they're just wanting to say, as a trainee, within some of the examples that they might be asked, is how might you answer particular questions if you've not had the experience of perhaps leading that team or managing that situation. And I think what you can do, if it's possible, is to go back into previous aspects of your training. So for example, if you go right back, you may well have been responsible for managing and coordinating aspects of the rota in the past. You might also have then had an opportunity to be actively involved in other aspects of management. It doesn't necessarily mean, you don't always need to have an example, for when you're asking about your own leadership style or how you might lead. It's more about, what you can do in the moment. So I remember vividly an example of someone who was a junior doctor who was working on a quality improvement project, and the project itself was quite small. So there was a department where there was a test that they were doing to try and ascertain within the back of the ward area. They had designed a new layout, so it was really, really quick to try and access all the material, and it was all colour coordinated to access it. And they did a kind of like a quality improvement where they looked at different floors where they didn't have it, and they did. And obviously within that example, because you were able to see where everything was, they were able to get to things really quickly. And one of the things that happened with that person was that they were able to kind of show that experience and then able to then model that elsewhere in the hospital. So they'd taken something that they had done there and then made it a little bit larger. So don't feel like it has to be something that is super uber. It can be anything that you've got where you can talk about your experience is really valuable. So I hope that I've been able to answer that one okay. And I think that there's a few things that I wanted to share, and then I'm very happy to take any other questions that people have. I wanted to look at elements about knowing your field, and it'd be really interesting for me to know around, you know, changes in your field, around future trends, thinking about, have you thought about where those future trends are? So I'm just going to bring this up now on the screen. And this is really, this question here is really thinking about 4 things. It's really thinking about changes it to your field. So what has been going on over the last few years? Obviously we've had COVID, but thinking ahead, thinking forward around what's going on again, you know, thinking about that. Then actually the medical profession as a whole, there has been some tremendous changes and opportunities that come from different roles that have been created, different synergies between primary and secondary care, and actually as an opportunity, how that might benefit you in your practice. So it's really interesting to think about that. Now, of course, keeping up to date with anything that's taking place within the NHS and the healthcare more widely. So I brought up something about the people plan, but there's loads of great stuff that you should potentially wanting to look at. And in fact, one thing that could be quite good to do is, for those of you, because there's a few of you mentioned about leadership, one of the things that could be quite good to do is, do you know the healthcare leadership model? So the healthcare leadership model from the Leadership Academy, let me know if you do, just say yes or no, but the healthcare leadership model from the Leadership Academy brings up 9 dimensions of leadership. And I think that that would be so helpful for, yes, so some of you don't know about it, a few of you certainly do, which is great. But what can be really useful about that is it gives you the 9 dimensions of leadership, and it can help you to break down how you might answer a leadership question. So for example, it'll have things connected to influencing for results. It has things on shared purpose. It helps you to think about you as a leader from 9 different standpoints, and it also helps you to think about, when you're doing that well, what does it look like? So I'd really recommend, it's called the Healthcare Leadership Model from the Leadership Academy. So for those that don't know it, please access it. And one of your colleagues has just asked me to just go back for a moment to the acronym slide. So I'll just do that for a moment, just to share it. It's this one here, just saying that it would be great to just be on that one for just a bit of a moment longer, which I'm very happy to. So just for those of you that need that. So just as a reminder, the camp one is really good for anything, the opening question, the motivation questions. Anything to do with the spies is around aspects of where you're really thinking about scenarios or certain ethical dilemmas, or anything around certain situations around governance where you might need to use that technique. And then the third one, the STARR, are around those behavioural competency questions. So where you can frame it in that way. So I'll go back to where I was, but hopefully that's for your colleague who just wanted to see that again, I've just brought it through. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was, do any of you have presentations as part of your interview? Could you just type into the chat box yes or no if you do, any presentations that you've got that you have to do ahead of the interview? Okay, so for some of you, you don't yet know. So for those that do, have you been given a format yet? So for those of you that do you know how? Yeah, brilliant. So you've been given, so some of you have been given a 5-minute presentation. And with that 5-minute presentation, is it about you? Is it about the department, your vision? Would you just let me know a little bit more around what the presentation's on? Because I think in a way that can also just help me in a sense. So many of you have not got one, but there's quite a few of you who do. And then there's a couple of you who don't yet know about how the format will evolve. But I think that for those of you who've got the presentation, as you know, 5 minutes, if you've got a 5 or even 10 minutes, it goes so quickly. And so the main thing to really say is around thinking about the actual structure. So so one of your colleagues, yeah, so this is brilliant. So I'm going to relay those questions that have come through because they're relevant to everyone. So these are one of the presentation questions is challenges and opportunities in healthcare for their specialty. And so that makes lots of sense to then think about. So it goes back to the interview question, but which I asked earlier, but actually you're doing a presentation. So one of the things that's going to be really good there is to perhaps think about what model you might use. So for those who've got questions around that, you could use the 7S model, which is really useful to have. Or you could use, so the 7S model is basically looking at the skills, the structure, the shared style, thinking about the leadership that you have, the shared leadership, the shared vision. So that's called the 7S model if you want to Google that one. The other one is where you might look at doing something like a PESTLE for the challenges and opportunities, so which is the political, the economic, the social, the technological. You could do also a SWOT analysis, you know, strengths and weaknesses. But the idea behind it is that you want to, with that type of question, you really want to have a look at the challenges ahead, but also the opportunities that it brings. So something like certainly a PEST would be really good to do. That's political economics, you know, as part of it, thinking about what it might bring, you know, because you may well think about business case activity that you could do. Yes, I'll repeat the two models. So one of the models was called the 7S model. So it's called, if you just type it in, it originated actually from McKinsey. And so, but it's really helpful when you're thinking about looking at opportunities and challenges, because it helps you to really think about your team. And for those of you who are going into new positions where you've got a team, it helps you to think about how you might create your team charter. And then the other model that I mentioned was what's called a PEST, P-E-S-T, which is political, economic, social and technological. So you can think about, and there's also two other parts to that, which is not necessarily relevant, but it sometimes can be, which is the environment and the legal side. But for you, I think the 4 would be key. And then the SWOT analysis, which I think you will know. And so these could be quite good around that type of question to just help you to think about what are the key things to bring out. And then the other thing is one of your other colleagues is got asked. So this again. So they've got a particular role within their specialty, and it's a senior role. You know, they're a senior team member, and the question that they're being asked is, what can you bring to the department? And I think that with that question, you could certainly use the CAMP technique, the clinical, the academic, you could use something like that to really help you to frame that. But also, I think what you want to be really thinking about with that one is around your special interests. You know, what is it that's drawn you to this aspect that you've got? So thank you so much for sharing it. But what I would say is that with presentations, it's a short period of time, so you do want to build up that narrative, that story that you want to share. When you're bringing it up on this, if you're doing it in person, then obviously you're going to have the technology there and then. But if you're doing it virtual, it would be really good to do a test run with someone else beforehand. So just making sure that when you're sharing the screen, it's coming up correctly as you want it to. And it's just really helpful to just do that. I realise that's obvious, but sometimes people forget to do it and it just doesn't work. The timing, of course, it goes so fast. So you, not always, but sometimes you are given a topic, and it's not so commonplace now, but I just wanted to bring it in just in case. You still need to know the timings and how to sketch that out. And what can be quite nice is that if you are given something to do there and then usually that will be connected to your own practice, your own clinical practice, and thinking about the department and the vision. Yes, so one of your colleagues is saying one of your colleagues is bringing up that it can be difficult to answer a question in 3 or 4 minutes if you're using CAMP or SPIES or STAR. Now, actually, for the interview itself, you will have a few minutes to answer an interview, and that opening one, the CAMP one, does work really well around structure. But if you're doing a presentation, it's more for sketching out the idea. You might have a few slides where you're doing that more than anything else because you've only got a few minutes. But you know, for a presentation, it's just more for sketching it out and making sure that you can do it in that way. And so, but thank you for bringing it up, because for the interview itself, you'll have a set time for the interview, but for each question that you're going to be asked, you'll certainly have quite a few minutes to be able to answer them. So using those can be very helpful. You know, you might find that you don't need it, but on the whole, it can be quite nice for structure. And so if anyone's got any other questions, I'm really happy to receive any other questions that anyone has. So don't hesitate to pop them up now. And then what I also thought I would do is share some further resources and support. And just as a reminder, for those who didn't hear the very beginning part of the session, this session is recorded. you will be able to access it at a later date. One of the things that you will find is that those of you who stayed for the live session, you'll receive afterwards, in the days ahead, you'll receive our team certificate of attendance in the coming days ahead. And one of your colleagues has asked around, with the behavioural questions, do I have any advice on the best way to prepare for those? So going back to the job spec and the job description, so if there was an example on teaching, for example, if we think about that one as a behaviour, that can be a behavioural question where around the teaching. What you want to really be doing is thinking about examples in the past, whether you do informal or formal teaching, thinking about the topics that you have, you know, who you're actually teaching to, the benefit and the value that you bring. And so I think in a way, one of the things that you want to do there is trying to think of the examples will help the framework. And I'm really hopeful that if you're able to do bits of that, and one of the things that I certainly do a lot of with people is get people to do it on with sort of flip chart with post-it notes of different examples, just to remind you of how many you've got for different types of behavioural competencies. And then there's a particular question. So great. So now there's this question that we've got here, which is any keywords for setting up a new service. Now, there is actually, I don't have it with me, but I don't have it with me right now, but do you know what there is? It's really good to do. I'm just trying to, basically there is something which is called the do nothing approach. So basically when you're actually starting something new, you know, and you're thinking about bringing aspects together, the do nothing part of a business case is saying, you know, if we do nothing, what will happen? And then what you then start to do is you start to think about the economics behind it. What I might need to do, if it's okay, I'll send a link to something on that for you to have a look at. The 7S model is also really good for doing for thinking about a new service and thinking about that. So I'll make sure that if that's okay, Amrita, I'll make sure that that's connected in afterwards. And then we've got a question here. What is the best approach? Yes. What is the best approach to answering questions about a scenario of a mistake in a previous job? Because it can be a bit tricky. Now, this is actually, it's not so much, I know this might sound strange to you, it's not so much the mistake, it's about what you learned. And so one of the things can be is that, you know, none of us are perfect. We will all have had instances where we're all vulnerable. You know, we all have our own, you know, we all have our own shared experience of have common humanity. We're all there. But I think what you want to really do is you can use the technique of doing the star. So you can talk about the situation, you can talk about, you know, what actually happened, but what's most important is actually talking about what you learned from that and how that's really informed your future practice and what has changed as a result of that. I was at something yesterday where someone was talking about something related to COVID, and they're in a vaccination centre, and there's a situation that happened, and one of the things that's as a result of that, they've got a brand new framework that now they're able to use to kind of mitigate risk. And so in a way, one of the things that's come from that is that they now know for sure the process that they would do to ensure that that doesn't happen. And I think that if you're able to think about the positive that comes from it, that's one of the best ways to tackle that. And then there's one final question, then I'll bring everything to an end, which is if there's a question that says, you know, talk me through your CV. So if you were talking about talk me through your CV, one of the things that you might want to think about is with talk me through your CV, you would still talk about, you can still do it by camp. So you would talk about, you know, so you talk about your most current role. It makes so much sense to talk about your current role and the clinical aspects of what you do there, and your areas of interest of what you bring from a clinical perspective. And then if you've got a particular journey, so academically you can talk about your background and if you've done any other additional qualifications, how that informs your practice. And then the other one is really thinking about, you know, you in terms of how you see yourself evolving in more of a leadership role. So from a management perspective, you know, what experiences have you had of that? And so you just bring it out. So if it's like talk me through your CV, it's basically still tell me about yourself. So it's still there on that. Now, this is a really good question that someone has also asked. So any tips on body language in the in-person interview? The answer is yes, I do. So for example, one of the things that's really good to do, I'm just going to see if my camera will work for a moment, and I'm going to show you on the camera because it doesn't always work. Bear with me a second. let me see if you can see me. Let me see if it works. No, it does. Is it working? Yes, you can see me. Okay, for a moment. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so can you, I don't know if it's gonna, yeah. So for example, in the in-person, one of the things that you want to be able to do is, so when you're sitting, so at the moment you're with a panel, usually within the panel style, you're kind of sitting, across from people here. And so the key thing really is around the way that you actually sit. So one of the things that you might find is that you're sitting at a particular angle to make sure that you're able to see everyone that you need to. And so that can be quite useful to do. Probably with your hands, they're not going to be moving around in a particular way. And so what you want to be able to do is use your hands in a way that's really meaningful for, so I just need to bring mine up higher so you can see them, but if you're going to use them, you're using them to tell the story, so, and the other thing is around just thinking about making sure around your eye contact, and also if you feel comfortable with the smile, but just the key things is that you want to make sure that you're moving around, and the person that's asked it, you will certainly be focused to them, but you'll also move around to everyone else, and you'll, as much as you can do, you want to have an open. Now, if you need to think, the other thing that you can do, of course, is that when you're in the in-person, you have got an opportunity to move into your own space. So if you see what I mean here, and for the panel here, they know you're thinking, and then you come back to answer. So I just want, so just to sort of let you know, there's a few ways of doing that. And the key, you can also move forward and back as well when someone's coming in, but I think for me, I tend to find that for the majority of people, it's good to really think about having the strength of like the posture of where you are, and just making sure that you feel, roll the shoulders, keeping good posture there, and just feeling confident about what you're saying and how you say it. And I think that comes across. I'll just stop the camera because sometimes it has a problem with the technology. But and then I think yeah, for some of you, if you're on a mobile phone, you won't be able to see me. So I've just vanished, but I'm coming to the end of the session. I think I've got everything covered. I think I've got everything covered that, let me just see that I can answer. So thank you all so much. Last thing to say is that there are particular e-learning modules and lots of things on for different types of roles. There's one specifically for consultants. There are some as well for ones that connect into for SAS as well. There's also ones that look at just more generally around the application process if you need it, ones on presentation skills, and there you can access all of these for free. But I'm so thrilled to have had an opportunity to be with you. Thank you ever so much for your energy and being involved with the question box when you can't see it. I realise it's probably harder, but it's just, thank you for everyone who's contributed and shared. It's just been so wonderful. But we're coming to the end of the session now, and good luck for you, those interviews ahead. And I think that you'll just go for it, and I look forward to hearing great success in the future. So take care, everyone. We'll just end the session now. Have a lovely evening. All right, bye.